Hello and welcome to this excerpt of a recent webcast we hosted in partnership with Explore Technologies. My name's Chris Aldland, I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and during this webcast I was joined by Steve Priestley, Cliff Adams and Bob Aschenbrenner. Steve and Cliff both working for Explore Technologies, and Bob is President of Durable Mobility Technologies. Across the conversation, we were discussing the evolution of rugged technology, and Steve, Cliff, and Bob not only gave us a look at some of the developments within the Explore range, including their new handheld as well as a two-in-one device, and we really got to grips with how the rugged technology space is continuing to evolve. We're no longer looking at big chunky laptops or tablets. There are a whole array of different options out there, and that was something that Bob really brought to the table as well, was being able to look at how these decisions should be made for various different organisations, what questions field service organisations should be looking to ask of rugged partners, and indeed how to select form factor. Across the presentation, which is available for Field Service News subscribers, Steve, Cliff, and Bob covered a huge amount of ground, but I managed to get them to agree to just a few more questions in a brief Q&A towards the end, and that's what we're going to have a listen to now. And we actually squeezed that little bit of extra insight out of them. So let's have a listen to that now. I've just been furiously scribbling away, as I always do in these webcasts, making some notes. I'd just like to put a couple of additional questions to you, if I may. The first one is kind of going back to the one of the earlier slides, and also my own personal experience, having had the opportunity to review the R12, for example, which I remember writing in the review. It was a very sleek tablet. It was something that looked a million miles away from when you think of rugged. Back in the day, I think one of you mentioned real chunky, heavyweight devices, and something like the R12 is, it's a very sleek, lightweight tablet for a fully rugged device. But then we see people like Samsung or other consumer brands that are putting out IP68 devices. I think my smartphone, my Samsung Note 8 is IP68. Are those lines blurring between the two technologies? And is there more to why an organization should choose a rugged manufacturer than just the specs these days? Is there an element of understanding the industry, understanding the enterprise, and be able to guide your clients through what is right for them? Or is there something that we're not missing? Are the consumer device guys pulling a trick on us by kind of waving around some stats that look very rugged? I don't know if any of you want to jump in on that question first.
But Chris, it's Steve, and I'm sure everybody's got a viewpoint, but let me just make a start by saying, I think you raise a very good point of, are the lines blurring? And I think at Explore, with over 20 years of experience, we would say maybe the words are blurring, but the principles of building a rugged device are not blurred. They're fairly common. We have built rugged devices from the ground up with the most rugged of architectures to support all the elements of rugged mobile working. And I think one of the areas where people often get confused is IP68. Well, what does that mean in an enterprise environment? What's most important in the enterprise environment is for us to be able to demonstrate that we are rugged, we are classified in the industry standard specifications, but our product still has all of the appropriate I/O, accessories, and capabilities to run the workflow for the mobile worker. And that has to be the same across all our devices. And we may share some common specs with consumer devices, but that doesn't mean they're as rugged as the products we provide. Bob, Cliff, do you have?
That's right. I want to jump in on the IP68 comment for a second. And a lot of consumer devices have very little I/O. As Cliff mentioned earlier, I/O is really important in the field. But without I/O, it's really easy to make an IP68 device. There are no openings or very few to worry about for water or dust to get in. So these consumer devices have kind of stumbled upon an IP68 rating and thought, hey, that's one of the things the rugged guys talk about. Let's declare that we're rugged. Well, that's not it. IP68 is one feature. It doesn't cover drops. It doesn't cover vibrations. It doesn't cover all kinds of different abuse like vibrations and such. So don't be fooled by one rating that they accidentally got when that's a small piece of the big picture.
Yeah, and if I can just add a little bit to that. So one thing that the IP rating doesn't give you in terms of dealing with a rugged environment, there's no or they have limited temperature ranges. So if you're going to be operating out in direct sunlight or in the weather and extremely cold conditions, that wide temperature range is something that you will not find on a consumer device. And if you need to be able to perform, then a rugged device is the obvious choice there. And especially on the tablet side, where you're running full-featured software applications that demand a lot of computing power, a sealed consumer tablet will not have a fan, and the fan is actually critical in order to maintain the full power of that CPU in those hot environments. So the Explorer rugged tablets have internal fans that are isolated from the elements, so they can still have a high IP rating, but still be able to dissipate that heat and maintain that productive power.
That's really interesting, because it's these kind of nuanced details that can often get overlooked. So it's things like the fans. I always find as well, you mentioned the hotter environments. Of course, the other thing there is the outdoor, and the screen resolution. Is it nits rating? Forgive me if I've got that wrong, but the brightness of the screen is always a major thing that gets overlooked as well in consumer devices. You need to be able to see the bloody thing, and quite honestly, if anyone's used a consumer device in direct sunlight, it's pretty hard, and that's going to hamper your job as well. So thanks for that, guys. Some great insight. The next question I wanted to ask, if I may, is it was mentioned that some of your clients would use a device up to 5, maybe even 7 years. The number that's generally thrown around is a 3 years is a good shelf life to have a device. Anything less than that, and of course you're going through the headache of rolling out and implementing new devices every 5 minutes, which can be a challenge. How should an organization decide what's right for them? How should they know, right, 3 years, now we need to move on, but they may not need to. Like you said, some of your clients are using devices for longer, or the other way, conversely, they may think, right, we've had these devices, we've sweated them a bit too much. How do companies go through that thought process in terms of understanding when is right to implement a new series of devices?
Bob, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, most companies, when they out deploying tablets, they create a project, think about a 3-year time frame, because 3 years is a good time frame to roll out new technology and have an ROI that goes positive pretty quickly. But the real issue is, does it still do the job? And most of that comes down to software. If the original device, mobile device, has enough processing power and memory to handle software, especially the updates that are pretty frequent and new capabilities being added, then that's where you tend to see people saying, hey, this is still working. I can upgrade my software. It's 5 years, it's 7 years. And that's when you see the longer uses in the field.
Thanks, Bob. I think, to answer your question slightly differently, Chris, there's a couple of things that go through my mind when this discussion comes up. Firstly, there's a financial discussion which says how long will the equipment be depreciated in the enterprise's financial statements. And typically 3 years is a good answer for that. It fits well with other technologies and it allows them to look at it in a common way. But that doesn't describe how it's used in the field. The challenge that Explore faces is that things will dictate outside of this what the life cycle of the device is. It could be something simple as data security, cybersecurity, that causes a change in equipment to drive an additional set of features. Or it could be that everything is absolutely fine, as Bob described, and after the 3-year period, they're getting free use for as long as they need to. I think one of the things that Explore would point to is that in our longest serving platform, we iterated the device to stay on top of the processing and memory and computing capabilities of the device for 17 years.
Wow.
17 years of a single ecosystem that an enterprise could get around. And yes, the device changed over time, but it remained the same form factor, and it allowed an enterprise to be stable in its use. Whether that enterprise is a government facility, military is a good example, or somebody working in a pharmaceutical clean room where absolute the top end of the specification is required. That's the kind of thing Explore looks to, being on top of the changing technical and customer requirements, as well as providing stability for a long period of time, both in its service and its product capabilities.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Cliff, any thoughts on that as well? Sorry.
That's a great point. I was actually going to say something pretty similar to that, especially versus consumer devices, where you'll see a new model come out that has a slightly different form factor because they're going after that aesthetic. Whereas a rugged device, we're really tailor made for enterprise environments. So change isn't necessarily good in those environments. Stability is something that enables them to keep their costs lower and have the devices deployed longer. And at Explore, we understand that. So we build our chassis so that they can be upgraded over the years, but still maintain a common accessory ecosystem over those generational upgrades. And so it's that sort of thinking and that approach to the market that allows us to hit those higher deployment times.
Of course, that kind of covers off another of those points as well, that kind of sometimes can get overlooked. One of the points that was made in the presentation was the series of accessories that are designed with an understanding of the workflow and are designed to complement the device completely in terms of understanding the ruggedity, the rugged specs, vibration elements and reductions in the vehicle, for example. Of course, if you're switching out every 5 minutes, then that becomes a very expensive thing if you have to invest in new accessories as well. One final question then for you guys, and this kind of feeds a little bit off the last question. We kind of talked at Field Service News in the past. I think it was echoed a little bit throughout your presentation that companies should have an understanding of the workflow of their different engineers. One organization may have a number of different engineer functions within their organization. And it makes sense for different engineers that have different needs and perhaps have different devices. Firstly, if you guys could speak to that a little bit and whether you kind of concur with that kind of decision, concur with that viewpoint that we came to. But secondly, how does an organization make that decision and not have the tail wagging the dog in terms of having too many devices? I mean, what is too many devices for a field service organization, and how do we kind of make that decision? Guys, again, whoever wants to jump in on that first, please do.
So, Cliff, do you want to kick us off?
Well, yeah, sure. So it's important to have the right device for the right person and the right workflow. And so at Explore we offer first of all an array of device form factors. Also within the tablet form factor, we have an array of computing options. So you can get an entry level CPU if that works for the user, and they don't need a top of the line processor, then that's an option as well. But we also offer within the same form factor high performance options, different I/O options. So there's a way that they can as an organization can manage a smaller number of devices and still provide some choice to the user, so that they're putting the right device and the right worker in front of the right worker at the right time. So
excellent.
And just to add to that, I think one of the things that we talked about very early on is the definition of the software to support the workflow you're trying to describe and automate in the hands of the worker. Often that will dictate the type of data that needs to be input, the type of data that needs to be viewed, and the type of data that any business information is driven from often dictates the type of device that the worker's going to use. And as Cliff said in an earlier part of the presentation, if it's a lot of form filling, repetitive task, barcode scanning, a handheld fits that bill very well. And as you move between that and our 12-inch, very much that is dictated to by the workflow itself. And we think, that our range of products allows us to put the right number of products or the right type of products into the hands of the worker to support the workflow.
Chris,
Excellent. Bob, you've
Chris,
got the final comment.
Hey, Chris, let me add a few specific examples, if I may. In utilities, you'll tend to see all the repair workers will use one kind of device, but meter readers and meter repair is a whole different area, and you might see handhelds there. And another example might be in law enforcement, where the beat officers, the officers at the front line, may be using a tablet, but detectives in the same police department tend to gravitate toward 2-in-1s. So those are a couple examples of how different organizations make these choices.
And that brings us to the end of the excerpt for this webcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this content and you found it insightful, which if you're a field service practitioner, I'm sure you will have, I strongly recommend you hit fieldservicenews.com/subscribe. If you're not looking at this content on our website, that's the address you go to and get yourself a subscription. Apply for it. We do industry complementary subscriptions for anyone that's a field service practitioner. So brief form, take you 10 seconds. Thoroughly recommend that you do subscribe to that and apply for that free subscription. As a thank you, if you're coming from this link and you're on our site currently, there's a link below. We will also send you the full copy of this exclusive webcast with Explore Technologies. We are in the age of GDPR, so please can I ask everybody to thoroughly read the terms and conditions. We have a plain English version at fieldservicenews.com/subscribe that tells you exactly what we do with your data, and everything is very, very transparent. But thank you ever so much for taking the time to watch. My name is Chris Oldland. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.